All right, we are recording. Hello, everyone. We'll give a few minutes for folks to keep coming in, and then we'll start with housekeeping. Welcome to Not Just for Kids, How to Use Picture Books with Tweens and Teens. Right, I see people still coming in. Welcome. Please feel free to use the chat. Let us know where you're from and what you're hoping to learn. I'll go ahead and start our poll. We have a poll just to just to get some sense of where everybody is with using picture books with teens and tweens. So we've got a couple questions up there for you that you can go ahead and answer. All right, I see answers coming in. This is looking great. All right, we're about 60% folks have used picture books with teens and tweens. About 40% say not yet. All right, give folks just another minute or so to come in.
Wow, it looks like everybody's from all over.
Yes, from all over the country. Wonderful. Good morning, California. Good afternoon, East Coast. All right. Thank you all so much for coming. We are so excited to hear from these literacy luminaries and all the great picture books that we're going to hear about today. I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping things. Our webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link in a day or so, along with a book list that we put together of the books that are recommended by our panelists, as well as any books that you have to recommend. So to that end, please use the chat function to drop in any books that you would like to share with the entire group. And please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen if you have questions that you would like to go to the panelists. My colleague Lois is keeping an eye on the Q&A, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So feel free to use both of those. We do have auto-generated closed captioning enabled. If you would prefer not to see that, you can click the button called Live Transcript to turn that off. And to start us off today, we'll do this poll. I see a few answers still coming in, and then I will share the results, and we will take it away with Carol moderating and our wonderful panelists, Betsy, Susannah, and Cicely. Thank you again so much for coming, and I really am looking forward to this conversation. So here's the results of our poll so far. It looks like we're closer to 50-50, 56%, 44% for having used picture books. So we've got some experienced folks here as well as newbies, and looking forward to getting ideas for introducing picture books to older students, as well as look at that book ideas list. I think we will have no problem giving you lots and lots of ideas today. So with that, Carol, why don't you take it away?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. Hi, I'm Carol Hinz. I'm Associate Publisher of Millbrook Press and Carol wrote a Picture Books. Welcome. We are so glad you're here to join us in this conversation. Before we begin, I want to very briefly introduce our panelists. The registration information included their full bios, so I'm just going to give you a very quick version. I'm so pleased to be joined by Betsy Bird, Collection Development Manager of Evanston Public Library, Susannah Richards, Associate Professor at Eastern Connecticut State University, and Cicely Lewis, Media Specialist at Meadowbrook High School in Norcross, Georgia. And with that, let's dive into the picture books. So to start with, let's talk a little about the reasons for using picture books with tweens and teens. Can you each share a little about what are the reasons and what are some of the benefits for doing this? For this first question, let's start with you, Betsy, and then we'll sort of rotate with different people answering first.
Sure. So I'm coming at this from a public librarian standpoint than anything else. In the past, I've paired with public schools. So when I was working in New York City, I paired with the Baird Rustin High School, and there was this teacher there, and she had a class for kids who might have been a little lower on the reading level. But what was so nice about the class was the entire class was about making books. It was writing, making picture books. So she would bring me in and I would just legit be sitting in front of, this big class of teenagers reading them Bark George by Jules Feiffer. And they're really scrutinizing it. They're enjoying the book on the one level. And on the other level, they're scrutinizing it, figuring out the form to a story, what works, what might not work. These are things that they're sort of taking back and being able to incorporate in their own writing. And what was so great about it was that it didn't matter like whether they were like the best readers in the entire school or anything like that. They could figure out like the mechanics of making a story. And then they could legitimately enjoy a picture book just on the level that a picture book is meant to be enjoyed. So in my own experiences, I guess, I've just seen picture books used with kids just on a sort of a story basis. The same way that comics can be used with kids. And there's going to be we're probably going to talk about a lot of the overlaps that happen with those two.
Cicely, since you are in a high school in front of those kids on a daily basis, can you speak a little about your experiences?
Hi. So as you mentioned, I'm a school librarian at Meadow Creek High School in Norcross, and my experience with picture books has been great. I've been very successful with them. The content of the books and the covers of the books truly attract the students to the books. I have a high ESOL population in my school, so I've been able to use books to connect with the students on that level, and also the special needs students. But in addition to that, we had a daycare for teachers here, and so picture books have really helped me to move into every facet, and they are truly a bridge. And they break down topics that normally would be difficult to discuss. So I love, love, love picture books. And I'm so excited to share all about picture books today with all of you.
Susannah, do you want to jump in?
So I'm a professor of literacy. I've taught for 11, 12 years, but I still teach. I've been literally zooming into classrooms every week, and picture books are everything. We talk a lot about the fact that they're for everybody. They scaffold, they do so many different things. So one of the things that I love about picture books is that many people don't realize that the vocabulary in a picture book is often more sophisticated than the vocabulary in a novel. And that vocabulary is so fabulous. And to show that, I'm going to use Jen Bryan and Melissa Sweet's The Right Word, the story about Roget, who invented the thesaurus. If every kid had an exposure to all of these words and the format and the context and all the great ways you can say, like talk about somebody's lifeline from birth to death. This is one of my favorite things to use with older kids, is the fact that a timeline doesn't have to start on the day you were born and the day you died. It can go through your beginning, your baby, your infant, when you were a tadpole, a child, a youngster, a whippersnapper. When was the last time you saw a whippersnapper on a timeline? The thing about picture books is they're accessible, they're scaffold building, they're everybody books. I can have a 99-year-old who is as happy and listening to a story that he or she or they've never heard. But I can also, I love how Betsy said, I can really talk about a child who is looking at the format and the delivery and how stories work, and they can do such a great job. And so the thing about the picture book is quintessentially the format that is the format that could change and equalize literacy in this country. And maybe it's the format that will really expose. I'm on a little bit of a Jen Bryant fan, and I couldn't find her book about Elgin Baylor, of course, that who we lost yesterday, but I did find her August Wilson book, which is Feed Your Mind. And here, for those high schoolers or tweens who aren't aware of all the different playwrights and the other kinds of things, not only is the format of this book delightful, inviting, and engaging, but literally the combination of the illustrations and the text are more than the sum of its parts. I don't really even remember, I think it was Perry Nobleman who said that a picture book is more than the sum of its parts, but that is so true.
Can I just jump off of something that Susannah just mentioned really quickly in passing? But you did mention the fact that the reading level of a picture book can often be higher than a novel. That is absolutely true. I mean, when we're talking about leveling, come on, guys. So, Clever Hans, which is a very timely book right now, because it's about blind tests. And with the coronavirus vaccine, blind tests have come up a lot lately. This is a 4.6 reading level, accelerated reading level, which is the same as Bridge to Terabithia, The Great Wall of Lucy Wu. I had a coworker who loved to show how Of Mice and Men had a lower reading level than Persepolis, which again, I always equate.
I think that's so important, Betsy, and I'm really glad you brought that up. Most people don't even know how reading levels are put together, that they're a combination of an algorithm that looks at the number of words, the number of syllables, the number of words per sentence. So you can easily have a picture book that literally trumps almost everything but the Brothers Karamazov or Moby Dick.
And when I first realized how the vocabulary was so much more developed and higher level, I know Spanish, and I speak Spanish and I write in Spanish. And when I became a Spanish teacher, we did something called biblioteca, and we had the kids to read picture books in Spanish to help them with their language fluency, which is another great way to use picture books in your library if you're on the high school level for your foreign language teachers or modern language teachers. And I opened up the book and I was like, wow, the Spanish vocabulary is so high level. And I go back and I look at the, English books, and I noticed that as well. So it's a great way to teach vocabulary. It's a great way to teach Spanish to our English speakers, not just English to our Spanish speakers too. So that's another great, this is Alma y como obtuve su nombre. And it's one of the favorites here at my school for my students.
I think that's such a good point. It's such a good point, because there are so many things, and beyond vocabulary, I think we also have to talk about something that Betsy just touched on, which is that idea of story making. We talk about this concept of books as mentors. Well, picture books are really quintessentially the body of the best mentors for text, because they model how to tell story and the format and what makes for a good story. And heaven forbid you should have to plot, literally the conflict and other things like that, but everything that happens. But in addition to that, they are able to provide content that you might not already get. And since we know, particularly in the content areas in high school science and social studies, that so many things are left out, I admit it. I often say that when I retire, I'm going to teach a book like How to Live Your Life and Win Jeopardy through children's picture books, because there's so many things that you can do. So here's an example. This is The Pig War, How a Porcupine Tragedy Taught England and America to Share by Emma Bland Smith, illustrated by Allison J. I didn't know there was a pig war until I was 55, and I'm only 56 now.
Yeah, I didn't know about the Tulsa Massacre until I was an adult, and I'm still angry about that. And then thanks to SLJ, the graphic novel from George Takei, was able to meet him in New York and learn about the Japanese internment camps, and all of this stuff was just not available to me. And now I set my son down with Unspeakable when it came, and I said, I want you to sit and I want you to read this book now, because this will not happen again. I want him to know about this tragedy that happened that has just gone under the radar for so many years. And so these books, as you mentioned, they can bring up topics, and they bring it to a level where everyone can join in the conversation. I have a book club with my family, and I have a 7-year-old, a 13-year-old, and then my husband and myself. We all can read a picture book, gain from it, have a discussion, and it's short enough where we can do it in a timely manner, where we're not just coming back and have forgotten. And so it's a great way to connect not only with students, but with your family too, on these topics that are really, they're very controversial, and a lot of people are scared to talk to kids about, what are your pronouns and what does that mean? I was well in my 30s when and I know this is, a particularly new concept that's coming out, but this has been out for a while, and I did not know about pronouns until I read The 57 Bus by Dosca Slater. And I was so embarrassed that I didn't know. And so I'm making sure that my students have this information and that they know it, so that when they go out, they can treat people with the dignity and respect that they deserve, and that they're knowledgeable. And let's just be honest, they're not many of the students are not going to complete To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, they're just not going to finish the book. And that's just, I'm just going to be honest. I know I might be breaking some people's hearts right now. I did finish that book. I taught that book, and it was one of my favorite books to teach as a classroom teacher. But we have to move beyond this ideology that this is the tradition, this is the reputable reading. And if you're not reading this, then you are below level. But that if they're reading and they're comprehending and they're using their skills, I don't care if you're reading a cookbook, you're reading. And so we have to take that negative stigma away from reading and embrace that. And I tell my teachers, they come in, one teacher said, this book has low vocabulary, you can't check it out. And this book, and I had to hold myself back from really, exploding. But I've talked to her and I said, we need to get these kids to read and develop that love of reading, and all of those things will come later.
I think that's so true. And I know Carol probably wants to ask other questions, but I feel like we can weave them all together in one way or another. But it is that whole attitude. And I know Betsy would agree with this because we've talked a lot about this. If they're reading, they are reading. Stop placing value judgments on it. Yes. Last week I did a webinar, which was basically a From Hinton to Hamlet webinar. How do we take a classical canon and really embed absolutely fabulous contemporary picture books, middle grade novels, graphic novels, YA, and other things like that have some of the same themes. Betsy.
Well, I'm just thinking that one thing that I think a lot of people our age don't quite realize is how
your young age.
You're around our age. Adults don't realize how different nonfiction picture books are now than they were when we were kids. I mean, when we were kids, we had some, and the facts, and there was fake dialogue everywhere, and it was just, I'm sorry, they weren't that great. I mean, some were okay, some were good, but it was nothing like what it looks like today. If you just walk blind into what we have available today, I mean, this is not my idea, a book about whiteness by Anastasia Higginbotham. I can't imagine in any other era this book even existing. And here it comes, and we have it available to talk about.
And it didn't even come out this year. It's been out for
it's been out for years. It's been out for years.
I think that's a really important point, that the nonfiction of my childhood, being the oldest here, was dry and boring. It was about the same people and the same topics. And with 7,200 books published for youth every year, the possibilities of everything. I mean, whether it's Stephen Hawking or more than one book on Henry and his Freedom Box. We have all kinds of books that can explore what's out there and tell stories of justice and social justice and scientific discoveries and so much more. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I don't know if Candace Fleming and Eric Roman could have gotten even a book like Honeybee, The Busy Life of, I never say it right, so I'm not going to say it. But would, this would have possibly been too specific for somebody, for a publisher in years past. And yet this book is like phenomenal in so many different ways. And I believe somebody's going to write their college essay on their obsession with the honeybee, and then they're going to get to go where they want to go.
So I want to jump in. We're already sort of moving in the direction I was hoping we would, but we've got the why. If anyone started this webinar not believing in using picture books for kids of all ages, I'm convinced they are fully on board at this point. But let's talk about how. Can you mention specific books? How do you incorporate them? And I think especially Cicely, with kids, your example of picture books with Spanish classes and foreign language classes, that's fantastic. Can we get into some more specific books and how you incorporate them in educating our young people?
So I'm the founder of the Read Woke Challenge, which is a challenge that gets kids to read books that challenge the social norm, give voice to the silence, and so my special ed, and it was going at the school, and it was great. And the special ed teacher, the MOED teacher, he came to me and he said, "We want to be a part of it." And I was like, wow, I was like, okay. So we modified it to where I would meet with them every Wednesday, and I would do read alouds with them. And upon completion of me reading 100 books to the students, and really we're all reading together, they would all get a Read Woke shirt. And when I tell you that was the best experience for me, like I would come in having bad days and being stressed. And on Wednesday, when those kids left, I felt so just empowered and just, I mean, they just really put so much into me. I'm thinking that I'm going to give them so much and I'm going to help them, but they helped me so much. And so some of the books that I used with them, and it wasn't on my list, but there's it's a yoga book. We did yoga together. We talked about yoga, the frog yoga. I also use books that, you know, really social emotional books, like how to, what do you do with the problem by Kobe Yamada, and talking about, you know, that growth mindset and how to handle problems. If you're having a bad day or you're being teased at school or you're having difficulty, how to work through the problem, and how, you know, basically when you break it down and you look at problems, you can see problems can sometimes be opportunities. And so it's just been a great opportunity for me. And the kids really drove the discussion. Like it just went into so many different ways that I didn't even imagine. And so one of the things that I decided to do was to stop being so, you know, tight with everything and just relax and just let it happen. Whatever happens as we read. And sometimes we'd be reading and they get up and start dancing. I'd get up and start dancing. And it was just a really therapeutic experience. And so it was great to really work with those students and bring them into the Read Woke Challenge so that they could get Read Woke t-shirts too, and so that they could be included, because that's what it really is all about. And that's why I feel like these books really, they bring all of us together.
From the public library standpoint, you know, it can be a little trickier to incorporate these into programming, but there's definitely ways to do it. We've got a graphic novel book club for kids. And when you bring up books like when this came out, When You Look Up by Descoeur, when this book came out, catalogers everywhere cried because they were like, is it a picture book? Is it a graphic novel? And the answer is yes. But a really thick picture book graphic novel, kind of a complex story. Some places we just put it in the graphic novel section, but then you end up with a lot of picture books in the graphic novel section and the kids read them there. And so if you do a book like this with a book club, at first it might be like, well, I don't know, it's kind of big like a picture book would be, but then they get into the story and they discover how complex and how interesting the whole thing is. It gets very fascinating. Other clubs that we have a Caldecott club that my coworker Brian Wilson runs, and we get a lot of older kids there, and they read all the potential Caldecott winners that have come out in the year, and they vote on what they think might win or might not win. They have subsequent discussions. They have little groups where the kids are like debating with one another the aspects of one picture book or another. It's like really fun. And then when we have like the kids come into the library, you got the fourth graders and the fifth graders, we do a lot of book talks. And for the book talks, slip a little picture book in there once in a while. Could be a nonfiction one, could be a fiction one, just for the heck of it. See what happens. It gets very interesting.
There's so many things that you can do. And I think we just have to open up our ideas. And we also have to recognize not all picture books are written for really young readers. Many of you may remember the 96-page January Sparrow by Patricia Polacco, which was a book about lynching. That wasn't for a kindergartner. It wasn't appropriate. It was a lot of blood. And speaking of things that are not appropriate for a kindergarten, The Enemy, a book about peace by David Colley and Serge Bloch, is a perfect example of a sophisticated picture book that pushes the potential for conversation. I always like to say that a really good book is the one that ignites, delights, and cultivates. It is not the destination. The book is the vehicle to the destination unknown. And so you don't even know what's going on. Right before you guys got on, Betsy and I were in a little conversation because I held up a book that she's like, meh. And I'm like, no, not for me. And these are also actually by David Colley and they're illustrated by Benjamin Chod. A funny thing happened at the museum, or I didn't do my homework, or The Truth About My Unbelievable Summer. Why do I love these books? Because these books push boundaries and help students to be creative and model and other things like that. And we shouldn't ask kids to write about what their lives are like, because not everybody has a story to tell. But when they can actually tell something, and you can say to a child, tell me what would your unbelievable summer or vacation have been like? We get to know their interests, what they want to be, and all these other kinds of things just by providing that stimulus versus I stayed home and I took care of my child, my younger sibling, which may not be the story they want to tell. And I think it's so important. And lastly, before we let Carol go on, I want to talk about the fact that with the picture book biography, we often send this model to kids that you have to know what you're going to be or how you're going to accomplish something, that all of these people started really young and they knew from the time they were 8 that they were going to change the world. And one of the things I love about this picture book biography, The Oldest Student, How Mary Walker Learned to Read by Rita Lorraine Hubbard and illustrated by Caldecott honor-winning Oge Mora, is the fact is that you can do anything at any stage of your life.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that my ability to be productive and make a difference isn't over because I've reached a certain age. And I love the fact that this models that you might not always get to it on somebody else's timeline. And sometimes I worry that picture book biography says that, look, there are all these people that did this amazing things and I don't know what I want to do. So the whole idea of a book as a mentor or providing an opportunity for kids to see the world and the possibilities.
Susannah, I'm so glad that you brought up that point. Actually, it was
I love this
something
book.
I do too.
yes.
It was on my mind. The Vast
Yes.
Wonder of the World, biologist Ernest Everett Just. It's by Melina Mungal, illustrated by Luisa Uribe. Ernest Everett Just was a curious boy. He didn't fall in love with science until he was in college. And even after college, he was hired at Howard University in the English department.
Yes.
But eventually did groundbreaking scientific research. That's such a good example of that story where a kid can see you don't have to know at age 8 what you're going to do with your entire life. And awesome, fascinating people don't know, and that's fine. And I think this would be so interesting, in a biology class, before you get into talking about fertilization and cell division. What if you give this a look and talk about sort of the work that contributed to the topic that you are understanding? Or in an English class, let's say you're going to read Black Boy or Native Son. How about Seeing Into Tomorrow? Richard Wright wrote these haiku at the end of his life. He's actually coming at the world with a different perspective than in those books that he wrote earlier in his career. I think it can enrich our understanding of who he is as a person. Nina Cruz did the photo collage in this book, and she has written about how making this book changed her perceptions of Richard Wright, who he was, what he did.
I think that's so important. And I think a lot of high school and teachers of middle schoolers don't realize that they can use a picture book to build scaffolding, to provide prior knowledge, that they can expose them to the vocabulary that might be helpful for them to discuss a person, a place, a thing, an event, an idea. And I think that's super, super important. And when you look at all of these books, whether it's Dazzle Ships or the Richard Wright book or the book of August. I literally can just explode about the fact that these books are have this potential. And it's also that book that can also be that chair and a half moment. It can be that quieting, comforting thing. And Cicely talked a lot about that idea, that social and emotional, that grounding, that making me feel like I'm comfortable and I'm ready to tackle this.
But by the same token, I think there is a lot to be said for highly disturbing picture books. Because comforting is good, but freaking children out is the right of every children's author. And this book, Wolves in the City, is the most disturbing thing that you will ever read in your life. And I'm an adult. It's by Margaret Wilde, who I believe was New Zealand. And this is a horror show. It's a true horror show. It is just the darkest, most frightening book of all time. Highly recommend it. By the same token, and this is the only way you can find it now, but The Rabbits by Sean Tan, which is about colonialism, but from the perspective of these animals on an island, and then these rabbits come in and just sort of take over. That is, if you want to talk about really scary, horrifying history, what better way can you do it than through, picture book metaphors? Sean Tan being one of the finest. I know I keep bringing up imports, but I do. I love imports. So, this one's Australian, New Zealand.
People might remember The Arrival, which is an ideal book to talk about with older kids right now.
Yes.
It's themes of immigration and it's themes of difference and unity and perseverance. So, by the way, we should be reading worldly, Betsy. So bring in whatever books you want that were originally published in other countries.
Weird Dutch books are great. Yeah, thank you. They are.
I love this. And just so everyone knows, we are compiling a book list of everything mentioned. So when you get the recording of this conversation, you will also be getting a spreadsheet with the whole book list discussed. We're also including, I think we got something like 300 book suggestions from people when they registered.
Wow.
I'm sure we have some duplicates, but you are going to all receive this list and you can sort of delve into it, see what works with your students, the young people in your life, the people of all ages in your life, really. I want to talk a little about some of the challenges from sort of these questions came up from people when they registered. There's some different groups that you might have to convince of the value of using picture books with older students. So first off, what about administrators?
Well, first, they're cheaper, just a little bit, but not much. The second thing is, the second thing is you can buy more of them, which increases your possibility for meeting a larger proportion of your population. The truth of the matter is that all the evidence demonstrates that if a child can identify theme and can compare and contrast with a shorter text, he, she, or they is going to be better able to do that in a longer text. And it is easier and more productive for them to practice with a shorter text. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. And I'm a cognitive scientist who knows all this stuff about how the reading rope works and how we do brain and other things like that. And I always say when it comes to picture books and graphic novels, the answer is always yes. So I'm just going to throw in one of my favorite little wacky little picture books, which is this book, Long Story Short, 100 Classic Books in 3 Panels. I love this book, written and illustrated by Lisa Brown. And I love it because so much, it's just a synthesis of some of those canonical texts that many of us may or may not have read. And by the way, we can't agree on the 50 books that every human being must read by his or her or their 50th birthday in order to be happy and successful. So we can't agree on that. Let's just go for the wide range. But here we see panels and really short panels. Everything is told really quickly, and the unbearable lightness of being and other things like that. This is a perfect example of how you can introduce kids to longer text, the themes of longer text, how you can prepare them. I'm going to tell you, when I taught AP English, and my students did relatively well, I introduced Charles Dickens with If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Why? I wanted them to understand that Charles Dickens was a circular writer and that every detail that he puts out for a reason. And you might not see how it's going to come back, but let's see what the cause and effect and how it comes out. So literally, I would introduce Charles Dickens, and it didn't matter which one because he was always circular.
Yes.
And If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, I kind of skipped the pig in the muffin part, but If You Give a Mouse a Cookie worked for me.
But from the high school perspective, in a school, you can receive a challenge from a parent, from the community. One of the things that I always, that we do in my county already before I even came, is we have a media committee that reviews all of your book purchases. And it's a compilation of different teachers from different subject areas, the principal and parents and community members. And so when you do have a book challenge, you have these procedures to fall back on. Another thing that I think that teacher librarians can do is bring the research to the administrator. Administrators love data and research. Something like rereading the same story increases vocabulary by 12%. And that students who are reading graphic novels are interpreting art and reading at a higher level. And this is going to raise your test scores by this. Another thing is building up trust. With the Read Woke Challenge, I hear from librarians all over the world telling me, well, they said I can't do this, they said I can't do that. Start where you can, build up the trust, and let the students lead. And that's another way to get things approved. And then another important thing, to know your guidelines, know the rules for your county, for your school, know them. And that by doing that, you're covering yourself, because you know what you can and cannot do. And so when somebody comes back, you can say, well, according to section 1.6 of the code, I'm able to do, etc. And I also would like to add, as a former language arts teacher, I miss teaching. And I just read Jump at the Sun by Alicia Williams, who also wrote Genesis Begins Again. And if you're teaching Their Eyes Were Watching God, that is a great book to introduce the story of Zora Neale Hurston's life and her legacy. And it really ties in with the dialect that's used in Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's also a great way to introduce a folklore unit. And it's also a great way to talk about the oral tradition and how important it is. And so I think we can definitely agree that a lot of these books can be used to talk about these topics. And I know Betsy talked about, different countries and different perspectives. And this book is called Escape by Ming and Wan. And it has vocabulary in it. And it basically talks about immigration and taking a stand from different people around the world. I think now when our kids look at the news and they hear immigration, they immediately think of the Latinx community of Mexico, and that's it. But what I think this really universalizes the story of immigration and helps them to see that there are people all over the world who are fighting back. And what I really like about this book is that it has vocabulary, a different vocabulary word to describe everyone's struggle and everyone's the way they progress. And so you're teaching vocabulary, you're teaching immigration, you're teaching history. And so it's a great book to use in a social studies class or just to really teach about tolerance and acceptance.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, books about tolerance and acceptance sometimes are much better done in picture book versions than they are in older versions out there. The People Shall Continue is probably one of the best histories of Indigenous people in America. This is the 40th anniversary special edition that came out a couple years ago, by Simon J. Ortiz. Similarly, I mentioned not my idea, but the thing is that I really love is that a lot of original research goes into picture books, stuff that you won't find in adult books. Dayglow Brothers is one example of that. I think
that's like one of my all-time favorites.
Right, and Chris Barton, I think, is the author.
Yeah, Chris Barton.
Yeah, and he had
Schweitzer brothers
entirely on his own, because there was no book on the guys who invented Dayglow. He had to do the research, go out, interview the people himself, and that happens a lot with nonfiction children's books. So
it's interesting you should say that, because one of the cases, it isn't a picture book, but when Sid Fleischman wrote about Harry Houdini, he was actually the only person to verify this piece of information that all the adult biographies got wrong, which was a photograph that Harry Houdini had actually altered, which every adult biographer had wrong. This is in the New York Public Library collection. So I think what a lot of people don't realize is how incredibly serious picture book writers take. Those critics in picture book writing, the people who write them, the editors, all the production people, they take this very seriously. Do not get it wrong, because we will make you get it right. And I think that really tying into what both of you were saying, I was thinking a lot about Classified, the Mary Golda Ross book, and this line in it that totally is like a game changer to me. When the boys refused to sit next to the only girl in math class, Mary felt motivated to get better grades than they did, and she didn't stop there. I didn't know who this amazing Cherokee mathematician was. I didn't know any of that, and I'm so glad that this is brought to light, and it's so incredibly important. But this, looking at this and thinking about what are those instances in our lives that may spark us to make a change, or may percolate with us for a long period of time. But I really think that's super, super important. And the truth is, I do think you can have a happy and successful life if you never read anything but picture books.
Oh, absolutely. I just wanted to do a quick plug for the Mathical Award, by the way, that's
Yes!
given out every single year to the best math books for kids and teens. Not enough people know about it, given out by mathematicians and a librarian who like this go through all the math books and find good ones. Math teachers as well are on that committee. It's so good. Mathical.
The Boy Who Loved Math won that award. Nothing Stops Sophie. These picture books. We have, of course, a new math biography that, of course, I can't put my fingers on fast enough because my brain is spinning. But the truth of the matter is, let's accolade mathematicians from all kinds of backgrounds. I'm so happy that there are architects from all over the world that kids can learn about now, not just the same. I mean, I live Frank Lloyd Wright. You live not too far from Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, Betsy, and other things. But the truth of the matter is, he wasn't the only architect in the world.
Cicely, can you hold that cover up? Tell us about this. Is this a sort of a display technique?
Yes.
It's interesting.
And I have a picture, if I can share my screen too, of my display.
Ooh, nice.
I don't know how that's gonna work. I'm probably pushing it, but I did for Women's History Month. My quote is, or my caption is, "That's what she said." And so I made this display. And what I do with picture books is I put them in when I do displays with all the other books. Like, I don't keep them, separate. I do have a separate section for them, so they're not mixed in and genreified. But and so with the books, I just took a caption of something that these powerful women said. And this one, it's kind of blurry, and I can stop sharing so I can show you on my screen. But it just says, it's the exact quote that Susannah said. And and that's the one that I put as her word bubble, and it's super long. But I found it so powerful because, like you said, I had never heard of her. As I mentioned before, the Tulsa Massacre, and so many things that I'm learning now, and that, kids can learn. And I think the thing about math is the math teachers are the most resistant to come into the library on the school level. And if you're a school librarian on here, that's true. And so I've made it my mission to really seek them out. And so I have had a lot of success with them, and I've been teaching with them, prior to COVID, and I hope to continue working with them further. But my true success has been working with the math ESOL classes, because they want the vocabulary. They really appreciate what I have to offer. So that was a way for me to get into the math department. So if you're having a problem with getting into the math department, that's a great way to get in.
I love that. I want to jump in with a couple things. I'm a big fan of Classified by Tracy Sorrell, illustrated by Natasha Donovan. And I want to mention, on our website, if you look up this book on our website, there's a tab called eSource. You can download a bunch of resources. And one of the things I love, Tracy Sorrell worked with a team to put these resources together. So Mary Golder-Ross was an aerospace engineer. So there are a bunch of suggested activities for different grade levels, from doing a paper airplane with your second graders to building rockets and doing all kinds of other cool stuff with your older students. But then, because this book, it is not just about science or just about Mary's identity as a Cherokee woman, there are Cherokee language resources, including, you could do your rocket launch with a countdown. You can count down in Cherokee, because you have the educator's guide includes that. There is a diagram of the solar system with the planet names in Cherokee. It's just really rich, really interesting. There's a lot to dig into. And I think that's the thing. A lot of these books, you might think, well, you could use it in this one class, but there are actually multiple different directions you could go.
I think that brings up the point that most teachers of teens and tweens don't realize that the publishers have so many teachers' guides and ideas and resources to support picture books. And whether it's Lerner and Millbrook and other things, or HarperCollins or HMH or Lee and Low or Peachtree, many of those publishers have absolutely fabulous resources that can help you build up the scaffolding. And I think sometimes you don't have to do everything in that resource. You might just take this one bite that might ignite something that will help you to increase the likelihood that your students will be happy and successful.
Absolutely. And then we worked with Dr. Sonia Cherry Paul to create a discussion guide for Unspeakable. Again, it addresses multiple grade levels, different ways into the story. You can look at the sort of historical elements, delve into more research and resources. You can also make connections with contemporary events, including what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, which is included in this resource because it was made after January 6th, it was completed. So there's a lot of different ways you can go. I have a printed version, but there's a downloadable version, and Rachel can drop the link in the chat to that as well. I wanted to hear a little about, how about students? Cicely, it seems like you've had great results in getting students on board. Have you also faced resistance? You've talked about ESL students. What about the AP kids? Are they saying, no, I'm too old for this. I can't do this. What are you experiencing with the students?
So what I did for my AP students, because I did anticipate that, but I didn't give them a chance, I do a database kind of lesson. I called it Tech Woke, where I was taking Read Woke books and having kids solve problems using technology. And I had these different stations where they could create. And one of the stations was a database station, because my school, we have over 70 databases. And when they go to college, they're going to have to use them. And so each group had a picture book. And the picture book had a topic in it. And I didn't tell them what the topic was. They had to read it. And from reading the picture book, they had to determine what was the social justice issue in the book. They had to locate 3 sources from the databases on that topic. And then they had a short little writing assignment. And it was very quick, but it served many purposes. It got them acclimated with the databases, creating MLA citations, and they were reading books about, social justice topics, and they were reading picture books. And I've had kids come back and say, hey, I need to get that book. And they check it out and take it home. And I make sure when we do book checkouts, if a kid says, I want to check out a picture book because this did happen, the kids were like, oh, they started laughing. Oh, you can't check that out. And I said, well, actually, he can. And I had a conversation with them and talked to them about it. And what I've also done, and they're so happy about, for the Read Woke Challenge, they can read a picture book as one of their books. Because, if you don't know, you have to read 4 books, and then you win this t-shirt and some other stuff. So one of the books can be a picture book. And so they love that because that gets them closer to the end. And they're reading, they're learning vocabulary, they're learning about these topics. So it's a win-win situation for everyone.
I totally agree. I say, I've been using this phrase, the book is not the destination, it's the vehicle to the destination alone. And I say, if you want to talk about survival, then it doesn't matter whether it's a graphic novel, a TED Talk, a picture book, a young adult novel, an Atlantic monthly article, which sometimes seems like it goes on forever. So they can come and they can talk about what is survival. And I think that's so incredibly important. We've made up these teacherized rules for how we teach kids to think. But actually, if we unteacherized and we just taught them to think, we would be in really better shape. I love what Cicely said earlier, and something ties into something Betsy said, this idea that I don't have to have it all scripted. I just put out a stimulus and I see what happens. And in the picture book world, Megan Lambert, who used to be at the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art, called that the whole book approach. And she really targeted how young kids interacted. But in the work that I do, I take that kind of approach and use it with older kids. Like, here's the book. I'm not going to tell you what to think. What caused you frustration? What do you want to discuss? What do you need to know more about? Let's have a conversation and find that out.
And we're getting something else that you can do with the older kids, I forgot to mention, but I contributed to an article in School Library Journal, is pre-COVID, I made these little packs, these literacy kits, and they had picture books and they had little flashcards and other crayons, different things like that. And my students could check them out and take them home and read them to their little brothers and sisters. And so they loved it. We decorated the bags. They were really cute. And I actually got that idea from my sister, who works in elementary. She's an instructional coach. And the station ideas, that came from an elementary teacher. And my sister is an elementary instructional coach. So we think about these things, like you said, Susannah, as being, oh, this is something that, oh, only the elementary kids can do. Station learning works for high school students on such a great level. It is the best thing that I've done in the library with them. And so I think we do have to, change our mindset about things that we do and make sure that our ultimate goal is the student success, no matter what it looks like, or, how we, like you said, how we get to that destination.
Fantastic. I've been seeing some questions in the chat about where do people find good picture books for older readers. So let's see, Betsy, why don't you start off and we'll go around to each of you.
That's a tricky question, isn't it? So many books are coming out. We are seeing more picture books coming out every year than the previous year. And it doesn't never go down. We get more and more little publishers that are springing up. And then just the sheer number of books. How do you dive through all of that to try to find the good ones? I'm going to put in a plug for librarians. You should check out your librarians. Your librarians are reading these books for you. And they are going through them. You can wait for the best of lists at the end of the year, and that's fine. But the librarians are reading them all the entire year through, and they're going to know the best ones. And you know what? Booksellers, doggone it, children's booksellers know a heck of a lot, and they often know a lot of this stuff, and they know which ones work with the older kids and which ones don't. So I'm going both ways. Teachers sometimes do as well. Teachers have a hard time. They're just so busy. But librarians, who are also busy, but we're busy in different ways, we are keeping track of all the newest books, and we're purchasing all of them, and we're reading all the reviews. So I just got to go with the old librarian on that one.
It's interesting because today's Tuesday, which we in the panel know is Pub Tuesday. So we know that books come out on Tuesday and other things like that. And I agree with everything that Betsy just said. Love your librarian. Absolutely love your librarian and support your librarian and your independent bookseller and other things like that. But the truth of the matter is, in 2021, you can find out about picture books on Twitter. You can use Instagram. Many picture book creators are on Instagram because it's a more visual platform and other things. So follow the people who are talking and posting images of picture books and other things, often with a little idea like, I use this for something, or I can't wait to see this, or did you see this line? So think about that. And then often you can go and see a little snippet of it. I'm gonna also make a plug for something that I think is underutilized. And that is if you go to indiebound.org and you go to the Kids Next list. The Kids Next list have been archived since they started in like 1996 or something. And the first page of the Kids Next list that comes out 3 times a year, I believe, or used to come out 3 times a year, it might be 2 now since COVID, is all picture book. Like the first part of it is all picture books. After the top 10, which may include picture books, middle grade, young adult, and graphic novels, the next part is picture books. So I say that's a good place to start if you want to find something, and they're diverse picture books and they're all kinds of inclusive, and Betsy has something, and Cicely, I'm sure, has something.
Okay, I just wanted to say really fast, PW Children's Bookshelf is the ` thing you should subscribe to. It comes to you twice a week into your inbox. It is a roundup of all the children's book news from the last few days. It is vital. Everything, and it talks about all the new deals. So we're like, oh, apparently this nonfiction picture book's coming out, and this one. Now it's going to be like 3 years from now because that's how the industry works. But still, at least I know it's in the works. But then it'll say all the new things and interviews with people, and has fun links at the bottom. And I love it. PW for Publishers Weekly, Children's Bookshelf. You can just sign up, totally free. You don't have to have a Publishers Weekly subscription or anything like that. That is my go-to.
No, it's a good go-to. And sometimes Betsy, of the 4 of us actually, Betsy is, sometimes she's in that with an announcement about one of her books.
Oh, that.
Well, I have to make a shameless plug. I have a column, a bi-monthly column in School Library Journal.
Yep.
And like Betsy said, let me do the work for you. But I mean, for real, you can go and get into to these PLCs on Twitter. I found so much information from social media, but I do have a column in School Library Journal. Also, in the very back of the magazine, if you subscribe to it, there are all these reviews. And I mean, I just literally go through and make my order from those. And then I follow great people. Make sure you're following some of these great people, following the learner social media, and also following different authors, your favorite authors that you like, because they usually plug other people. I love following Nick Stone. I love following Lamar Giles. I also follow librarians like Joyce Valenza and Jennifer, who's one of my favorite librarians. And I also use hashtags. So you can use the hashtag ReadWoke. And I'm telling you, when you go through that hashtag, you will see some amazing things. There's also hashtag Own Voices, which I think is very, very important. And that's something I look at when I purchase a book. Like when I looked at Classified, I immediately went to the back and I was just like, I want to know that, because I want to know that these stories are being told from the Own Voices community. And so I think these are, great ways to find out about books. And another thing that I'm really, really passionate about is curating these lists. And I curate lists in my Destiny collection, in my e-circulation and Destiny collection. You can curate these lists. I've curated a ReadWoke list. It's open to the public. So if you're using Destiny Discover or Destiny, then you have access to that, and you can make your own list and you can share those too. So there's so many ways to find out about great books. Another thing is Reese Witherspoon has a book club that I follow, and I've been finding some great, those are adult books, I'm sorry, but I've been finding some great books on there. So finding your community, getting in a book club and reaching out to people, and just and follow me too, because I post about books all the time. Like, that's all I do. I don't clean up, I don't cook, I don't do anything. All I do is just talk about books all day. And I know my husband is sick of it, but let me do the work for you.
And I think some really good things are showing up in the chat. If you don't know about the Brown Bookshelf, if you don't follow Cynthia Leidig Smith, if you don't follow our publishers' imprints, Harper Stacks or Candlewick School Library, there are lots of places that if you want to, and if you're not sure where to start, go to Betsy's social media or Cicely's social media or mine and look at who we follow or who we're tagging, and then just start there and just accumulate those. And next month is April is Poetry Month, and I'm going to be posting, I've had some of my author friends, one of which is on here, help me make spine poems. So we're going to be making spine poems of some of the books we want to put on your radar. So a spine poem is really simple. It's actually an old form of found poetry, but Travis Yonker really helped kind of increase it and whatever. But basically you take the spines and you put them together and you rearrange them. I didn't really just make this one, so I'm not going to pretend I had some, but I'm going to post some different kinds of things for spine poems. And something that I think that Cicely did that's so super important. You want kids to read picture books. You want to read them and think that they're cool. Make them spine out in your lives. They've got to be spine out. They've got to be able to see them, smell them, touch them. They've got to know what the parts are. These are end pages. There's back matter. This is the gutter. Is this image bleeding? What does it mean to bleed? What is a half bleed? When you say to a group of older kids, this picture is bleeding, they're like, what are you talking about? And look and do.
And I agree with that, Suzanne. And I think that a lot of times we don't give a lot of credit to the illustrators. I was thinking about that the other day, and I try to make sure that when I tag them, I try to find the illustrators. It's sometimes hard to find them, but some of these picture books would not be as powerful as they are without the illustrations. I love Unspeakable. I love the words, but look at this. This is
with the needed eraser.
Yeah, this is so beautiful. Like I just stared at it and just looked at this, and
Floyd Cooper.
Huh?
Floyd Cooper.
Floyd Cooper.
Yes, I think we need to really
made up that technique.
Yes, these books can be used to talk about art and bring in art classes and things like that, because this is powerful. And the picture, there's books out where and a lot of the kids really like them, where it's just photography, or it's just pictures, no words. And as a language arts teacher, former language arts teacher, I used to use those as writing prompts, and to get the kids to talking about different things. And when you're teaching research and you're working with students in the library, I think kids think research is just a paper. It has to be MLA format. You got to have direct quotes and all this stuff. But research can also be collecting photographs and collecting images and citing them. So I think when we talk about picture books, we also need to make sure that we're talking about the art and the power of the art, because that is truly what makes it so powerful.
Absolutely. All right, we have 1 minute left. Can you believe it? I'm pretty sure we could go on for another hour with no problem, but we're going to have to wrap it up. Again, we're putting together a book list with all of the books mentioned today that will be sent out to you, along with a recording of this webinar. There's so many books on our list that we didn't even get to. I'd just like to ask all of you quickly, any closing words you want to share with our attendees today. Betsy, you have something you really want to say.
Really quick, I forgot to mention this. Every year for 31 days in December, I do a different list a day. So if you want to see all the best photography picture books of that year, I have a list for that. If you want all the international translation picture books from that year, I do that. It's called 31 Days, 31 Lists. Basically, just plug that into Google with whatever type of list you want. I've got a list for it. I've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years. They're fun.
I want to make a plug for what Cicely said for the photography book. This is a book, This Is My New York, a New York Story by Neela Bashwani. I think we don't use enough photography books with kids and talk about the fact that an image tells the story. And with smartphones and other things like that, how are you using and capitalizing on the smartphones to stage or tell a story? And this book seems on one level like it's not for really high older kids, but I've used it with kids who want to find their story to tell in 1, 3, or 7 pictures. So we use 1, 3, or 7 pictures, which is super fun.
Oh, I just want to say that I'm all about making kids read something and do something. So once they get these books and they start reading, challenge them to take it to the next level and find out what they can do in their community. Books like We Are the Water Protectors. When we think about being woke and re-woke, a lot of people think about racism, but there are other issues like climate change and the big black snake, as she talks about in the book. And these are powerful conversations that we need to get our students involved in, because they are going to be future voters. They're going to be out here making these decisions. So we need to be teaching them about all of these issues and making sure that we are having a diverse collection that's covering and encompassing all issues and recognizing everybody.
Thank you, all of you. This has been fantastic.
Yes, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you everyone for attending. You can see our panelists' Twitter handles here on this slide, and we will include those in the follow-up. So just to reiterate, we'll be sending out in a couple of days a link to the recording of the webinar, a link to a book list that includes everything that the panelists mentioned, everything that was submitted during the registration process, and everything that was dropped in the chat, including all the resources for finding great picture books as well, since that's been such a valuable crowdsourced resource. And we'll also include, again, social media links, but if you want to go check everybody out on Twitter right now, here are their links. I want to say an extra special thank you again to our panelists. This was an amazing conversation, and sorry, not sorry to everybody for the way we just grew your TBR pile, because this has just been an absolutely excellent conversation. Thank you all so much for attending.